Hello, good evening, and welcome to UPfront. My guest today is the former Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. He is a wonderful economist by all standards and qualifications. Dr. Nimoy Thompson is my guest. Our focus today will be on the state of the economy and also the Ghanaian budget and whether it's been able to deliver many of us from the current state that they find themselves. After this break, we start our conversation. You're welcome back. My name is Raymond Dalqua. This is Upfront. My guest today is a wonderful economist. I've told you before. He's known, clearly. He has credibility in that particular space. And he's known for his wonderful analysis of the Ghanaian economic situation and his wonderful prognosis and some of the solutions he professes, even though not all of them are taken all the time in this particular case. Dr. Nimoy Thompson is a former Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
I hope you're doing well.
Yes, I'm doing terrific. I hope you are too.
Yes, I'm coping.
Good.
Now, I want to start from this state up because clearly you understand the Ghanaian economy than most people. Mm-hmm. When you're asked the state of the economy today, what would be your direct response?
Well, it's certainly a challenged economy. There are challenges that need to be overcome. Growth is not where it ought to be, certainly. Don't forget the government promised us double-digit growth. We are far from that. In fact, last year was 8.1. Mm-hmm. They are projecting an even lower overall growth, and that's including oil. Okay. But excluding oil, it's much lower. It was 4.6. I think it's going to be going up to around 5.4 thereabout. Mm-hmm. So we're still far from the double-digit growth that we really need to blast the economy into orbit.
When you say it's challenged, mm-hmm. you're not saying we are on the wrong path. You're not saying we are failing. You're actually saying that there are some difficulties with the current state.
Most definitely. The most obvious one being the challenges in the financial sector.
Okay.
Finance, of course, is the oxygen of any economy. And so if you're having challenges in that sector, it's to be expected that it will have a ripple effect in the rest of the economy.
Will we do the 8% and more that we wanted to do this year, growth rate? Mm-hmm. Can we meet that target?
Possibly not.
Because the IMF, the World Bank are both suggesting that we are going to do around 6 to 7%.
That's what they are predicted. The 8.1% was for last year.
Yeah.
And even the lower growth rate, again, as I said, the ideal situation should have been double digit. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we didn't do that for a number of reasons. And now we have the financial sector situation to contend okay. with. There are major institutional bottlenecks that need to be addressed. Therefore, within the context of institutional reforms, which were proffered in the long-term plan, these have not been undertaken. And so they also impede economic growth.
I see.
In addition to the crisis that we are having in the financial sector. But even before we get to that, there are bigger contextual issues.
Okay. I
haven't really heard the government comment on that, or anybody else for that matter. It was just treated in the news when it happened, and we've kind of forgotten about it. But it has serious implications, and that's the rebasing of the economy.
Okay, I'll come to the point.
Okay, no problem at all.
But it's instructive to know that within the same growth period that we're talking about, the second quarter of 2017 was actually 11%.
Right.
And we are looking at 2018 having a second quarter being around 5.4%.
Exactly.
Is that a sign of a bad end for the year?
Yes, it actually is reflective of other indicators in the economy. If you look at the Bank of Ghana's banking sector report, it tells us the real credit, in other words, credit adjusted for inflation, has actually gone down. It's negative as of the middle of the year. And again, if you are not investing, then clearly the economy will not be growing. On the government side, there's been substantial reductions in infrastructure spending. In fact, a major flaw in economic management and fiscal policy that dates back several years, in fact decades, that we identified in the long-term plan is still being perpetrated, which is spending towards consumption, current consumption, and cutting back on investment. It's been our single biggest challenge in economic management in this. And it's not just consumption in general, but the wage bill or compensation bill, we are consistently exceeding them for whatever reason.
But we realize this on the mills, and
that's why I say it goes way back,
yes,
way back to the 80s and even 60s, where we consistently exceed our wage bill, even when we are falling short on revenue. The last 10 years, also between 2008, 2017, every single year we exceeded the wage bill. Every single year, even as we were falling short of revenue.
I see.
And we are doing that this year also, without corresponding efforts to even boost productivity in the public sector. It's a major challenge. And so long as those structural contradictions exist, no matter which government is in power, no matter how elegant and perfumed the promises, they're going to find it very difficult to deliver development.
So what you're saying is that we are recruiting more people or paying them more?
It's a combination of the two.
And yet, we're not producing enough?
Precisely.
But this will not happen in the private sector.
Say that again?
This will not happen in the private sector.
What do you mean it will not happen?
Actually, no private business would, mindful of the fact that they're not producing enough, be paying its workers more.
Yes.
And actually recruit more people.
Exactly. They may do that.
What would they be doing anyway?
Exactly. But this is the problem with the public sector. And it's amazing. It reflects the decline in meritocracy and systems in the public sector over the years, where just about anybody these days can get on the government payroll. When I was in office, I heard of stories of someone who was going on retirement and they managed to get their housemaid onto government payroll, for example. We have the phenomenon of people always reducing their ages. For some reason, they like the number 3. They reduce their ages by 3. They say, well, I was born in the village. My mother didn't know until the time they were about to retire.
That's when they realized.
That's when they realized. So you have, they talk about ghost names, or no one talks about the walking dead. They're there for all practical purposes. And then we keep adding to it every year. We just did NAPCO. 100,000 people just added on to that.
But they needed jobs.
Well, NAPCO is not an employment scheme. It's a training scheme without any guarantee of employment. They're supposed to exit after 3 years.
After 3 years, yes.
And for all we know, they may all get employed or they may all be unemployed after we spend 210
But government is guaranteed
million.
that some of them will be employed.
In the public sector or in the private sector?
In the public sector, predominantly.
But that's the problem, because there's already an excess of labor in the public sector.
Is there?
Oh, of course.
I mean, the contention for Imani, for example, is that we need more labor. We need high-skilled labor. I mean, our labor gap analysis suggests that we still need high-skilled labor.
That's why we use the term rationalization. There are certain areas of the public sector where we need more people.
Yeah.
And there are certain sectors where we simply do not need any additional people. And even in instances where we have the people, they don't have the resources to work with. So you look at NAPCO, for example, one of the modules is for extension officers, agricultural extension officers. Now, I did research
that should be good,
in agricultural, right? Well, it depends. I did research in agricultural
There's a huge vacuum and a need for extension officers.
But in my research, we found extension officers sitting around doing nothing.
Really?
Yes.
Which part of the country would this be?
In the eastern region. And not because they didn't want to work, but they didn't have the resources to work with. They didn't have the motorcycle to go out into the field, or they had the motorcycle, but there was no money to buy fuel.
So the problem is not really recruiting more extension officers.
Exactly. So if you add more there, the question is, are they going to have the resources to work with?
Contrary to what we've been made to believe, that we need more of them.
It may very well be, because this was just one community that I went to. It may very well be that we need more. We'll have to do the diagnostics to come. But on the basis of this case study, they didn't need more extension officers in this particular community. They needed more resources to work with. And in this particular case, because they didn't have the motorcycles or the fuel or whatnot, they were using public transportation. So they would go to the nearest town and wait in the public transport till maybe 10 or thereabout for it to get full before they went to the farming community. So they'll get there maybe 12 or whatever. And then the time for actually working has been reduced because they have to come back. They have to maybe 3 or thereabout. And so you have all these inefficiencies built into the system, in addition to just people sitting around doing practically nothing.
So let's be clear, NAPCO is a good thing.
It's a good thing, but we need to be mindful of its limitations. It's not the silver bullet that we think it is. It is not solving...
just like the National Youth Employment Program.
Precisely.
Just like YEA's many modules.
Yes.
This is a stopgap.
That's why I'm saying it's first of all, government shouldn't create the impression that it is that which should solve the unemployment problem in this country.
Okay.
But that's the mindset that we've created among Ghanaians, not just this government, the previous government, all the other governments.
Okay.
Like, I will solve your employment problem. The problem is that government can never, ever. The last employment survey that we had said there were 1.2 million people unemployed. I don't know how many have been employed. We're adding about 450, 460,000 more every year and so forth and so on. Government in no way has that capacity to do that. Now,
government already says created jobs for almost more than 1 million people. Well, that's a step in the right direction. That's like 80% of the problem solved.
No, obviously, of course, once we interrogated that, it's people they gave fertilizers to and they were considered employed. But again, it goes back to building institutions, because one of the key recommendations of the long-term plan, in order for us not to dispute these figures when they come out, is to develop a labor market information system, LMIS.
I thought they started that, the status quo
more than 10 years ago. And it shows you how serious we are not in doing. More than 10 years ago, we've been working on the labor market information system, which will give us simple, objective statistics that no one can, just like inflation. It's there. You can't go and stand there and say, well, I reduced the price of tomatoes or one, because the inflation rate will tell us. Similarly, the labor market information system will give us the unemployment rate, the vulnerable employment rate, and so forth and so on every 6 months by sectors. Is it employment? Is it agriculture? Is it services? By region, by district? Then we can use that to inform debate. But we don't have that. And so anybody throws out any numbers that, well, I've created 1 million jobs. You only have to drive through traffic.
We'll come to employment. We'll come to what a sustainable means of dealing with this particular problem is supposed to be. But there's a major question in this country, a question of major debate. Are the economic fundamentals today weak or strong?
They're obviously weak. If the economy is not growing the way it should, if we are falling short of revenue consistently, we did last year in the minister's mid-year budget review, we fell short. On the other hand,
forgive me, on the other hand, inflation heading in the right direction?
Inflation has been heading in the right direction for a long time, but we actually want it much lower. It's not enough to head in the right direction, but the magnitude of it also. Currently, it's still hovering around 9.6, 9.7 thereabout. We needed to go, but somehow it gets stuck there. And there are institutional and structural factors that hold them up there. One of them, obviously, is government spending. Whenever you consistently exceed your budget as government, you feed consumption. And consumption in the face of limited production possibilities then leads to higher inflation and also puts pressure on the exchange rate, all things being equal. And that's been consistently the case. The last time we actually had single-digit inflation and kept it around 8% or thereabout when Pakwesi Misata was governor, was when he managed to really rein in government spending, where he drew the line and said, no, you will not spend 1 cedi more than it's entitled.
He was fairly insistent on the independence of the central bank.
And he had the advantage of having been a finance minister before, deputy finance minister. So, and he sat on the Bank of Ghana board. So he had that global view of things in terms of the role of consumption or demand in contributing to persistently high inflation. So we need to deal with that aspect of it that we haven't done. I am very troubled, as I alluded earlier, about the consistent growth in the wage bill without corresponding efforts to extract productivity from. I mean, go to the typical government office, and this is...
To be fair, productivity was the second strand of the single spine salary structure. That after settling and making sure to rationalize the wage bill, we will be in the position to now demand of the people we have employed the requisite productivity in this case. We seem not to have headed that direction up until now. Is there any problem with that?
Have you been to a government office lately?
Yes.
Have you seen them with their flat screen TVs?
Yes, very much. Everybody's looking up there.
Everybody's watching TV. Or if they are front office people, they are sitting there, WhatsApp, eating Diehu or Banku or whatever. Complete lack of professionalism in the public sector. complete lack of, and these are the
but that
things.
will not change overnight. It's difficult to replace public officers today. You have to go through a very strong process. You have to demand a very long retinue of them. At worst, you can transfer them to a place that they may not be comfortable with, but really, sacking a public officer today is a very difficult thing to do.
You don't necessarily have to sack them. First of all, you need to improve systems. When I was in office, that was one of my biggest peeves.
Okay.
Outlaw the watching of television in offices. It's an indicator of a bigger problem. It's symptomatic of that bigger problem that people actually go into office and they sit there watching TV and on social media the whole while every year the government actually bends over backwards to make sure that they're paid, only for them to sit there. First of all, they come in late. They watch TV for the better part of the day. Even when they can do something, they refuse to. There was an example of the Minister of Foreign Affairs paying a surprise visit to the passport office a couple of months ago, and she was accosted by a client who said, Madam, they asked me to come today for my passport, and they're telling me to go and come back again. And so she asked for the slip and said no. So she went in there, and lo and behold, the passport was actually there. But the person just decided out of sheer wickedness not to give it to the individual. Go back, I don't know where you came from, Sunyani or whatever, go and come back. So until we really fix this problem, the public sector as it exists now is not capable of delivering development, much more transformation, no matter who is the president, no matter who is in government. It is simply not there. And the story is all over. Later on after the break, I'll show you a graph here of China and India and the role of institutional reforms. Around 1990, they both had per capita income of around $340 US. Today, China has about 8,000 US dollars. India is hovering around 2,000 US dollars, the same as Ghana pretty much. And the key difference is institutional reforms.
Really?
Yes.
Public sector reforms?
In public sector reforms. And of course, privatization.
But to be fair, we've had ministers in charge of public sector reform for God knows how long. We've tried to make sure that we do the same reforms in this establishment. But exactly what's in the Ghanaian DNA that's immune to change?
It's the approach. First of all, we go to donors. There are certain things we can benefit from when we go to donors. There are certain other things that we need to embrace as Ghanaians and be committed enough to fund all by ourselves to be successful. Just as we've done with the Black Stars. You realize that the donors don't give us $1 for the Black Stars, but we are so committed that we fly money to them. We build houses for the coaches and all that. We need to do the same thing with public sector reforms. Donor monies won't work because the donors themselves, based on my own observation while I was in office, tend to be very competitive. So that even as they are saying, well, with aid effectiveness, let's work together as one and so forth and so on, each donor wants to be seen as the one that helped Ghana to reform its public sector. In the end, we have cross wires. So a lot of money is spent in
very little results.
There's very little results. And now I understand we're actually going to get, I think, $45 million or so to embark on yet another public sector. It's not going to work, unfortunately.
Is it the people who are carrying out these reforms, or the problem really is with the people who are the recipient and receiving end of this?
You need to be. I heard the president say recently, actually, that it's a long-term effort on the price. Yes, to some extent, but if you really must attain results, there are strategic interventions in public sector reforms.
Specifically where?
So what we call catalytic interventions, areas where you realize, for instance, they started with the ports because they have catalytic effects. If they work efficiently, the effects will spread throughout the economy. The provision of utilities. You shouldn't spend more than 3 days getting a meter. You shouldn't.
Really?
It's there.
We've had the ambition of trying to do this in times past. We set for ourselves similar targets, but it never worked.
Because no one followed through. We don't have M&E systems in this country. In fact, that's another thing we talked about. We tend to initiate policies without any monitoring and evaluation systems in place to monitor them as they're being implemented and then evaluate the impact. We simply launch them and then look elsewhere.
But we have a ministry for that now.
For
monitoring and evaluation.
We have, that's
and again, virtually every single ministry has a department like that.
That's the thing. But the ultimate responsibility actually lies with the National Development Planning Commission.
Monitoring and evaluation?
Yeah. It's actually, there are three key functions of the National Development Planning Commission. Development planning, monitoring and evaluation, and research to inform public policy.
Okay.
This is why the president, whoever he is, must take NDPC seriously. They've never done that under the Fourth Republic, and they are paying the price for it.
I see.
Because you miss these critical, every single serious government out there that wants transformation has the equivalent of NDPC to serve as a kind of a brain trust to inform public policy. The US has the Council of Economic Advisors, set up in 1946, Full Employment Act. Malaysia, Korea had the KDI, Korea Development Institute. Ethiopia set up the EDRR, Ethiopia Development Research Institute. I was a consultant there in 2006, actually, to help them, and it was based directly in the office of the Prime Minister. We, for whatever reason, have marginalized this key state institution, and we're flying blind.
And then I'll come back to, because development plan is important.
Sure.
And we've seen that we've also suffered from not being able to do that consistently and follow through throughout our history.
Yes.
But I was talking to you about the fundamentals of the economy and how weak or strong they are, and you were saying that we were weak. Your examples are...
We below ideal growth is one of them.
Okay.
Recently we heard about Ghana exporting electricity. People have even been talking about excess electricity generation capacity. It's not really excess. It's just that industry is not up to where it should be. So they are not utilizing the electricity that we had projected. If we're really blasting at full speed, the electricity we have would not be enough. Don't forget, in the long-term plan, we actually proposed 25 strategic growth areas that will steadily start consuming electricity. In fact, one of the things was that we should even stop talking about installed capacity, megawatts and all that, and look at electricity consumption per capita. That's a much better indicator of progress, because you can have installed capacity growing, but the actual electricity available for household consumption, for industrial use,
may not be as much.
May not be. And in our case, we compared Ghana to South Korea and Malaysia. In 1980, they were very close like this. By 2011, 2013, huge gap. Ghana remained relatively flat, even though our installed capacity has been good. So that itself is a misleading indicator. Okay. It gives a false sense of progress.
But clearly, nobody is taking care of the losses in this case.
Say that again? Oh, the losses are there.
Yeah.
And then another example of how things are kind of wacky, for lack of a better term, is the fact that in more industrial societies, they use more electricity during the day than they do in the evening.
Okay.
In the case of Ghana, it's the opposite.
Yes, because we call our peak hours in the evening.
Because there's hardly any industrial activity taking place. Most of the economic activities, informal sector activities, hardly use any electricity.
Talking about the structure of the economy.
Yes, the structural transformation. And you need to have the institutional basis. As I was saying at a lecture recently, institutions are to development what roots are to a tree or foundation is to a house. If you don't have your institutions in place, no matter what you do, it's like an old engine and you keep pouring premium oil into it. You're not going to get the best results. That's what we find ourselves. So institutional, so and I've given you a copy of this, sorry to your viewers, on page 3 of it, there's a whole list. In fact, we have structural enablers of growth, where we said the government. So why are interest rates high in Ghana? There's a website called tradingeconomics.com.
Yeah, tradingeconomics, yeah.
I saw a figure there, I haven't verified that yet, but they were saying that we have the highest bank lending rate in Africa. And second highest at the time.
Pretty high.
Over 30,
yes.
they were saying.
Yes.
It's come down slightly, but still very high. Now, one reason is that we have very low domestic savings rate. It was 13%. It should be around 30%. Now, under Vision 2020, they have projected that we should by now have 30% domestic savings rate, but we're around 13%. So funds are scarce. That then raises, and when we talk about savings rate, it's not just bank savings, but also government savings, whether it has a surplus or deficit, business profits and all that. All these things are lower than they should be, and it's a structural problem.
And it's not more of the non-performing loans, it's not more of the current state of the banking industry. These are not the main reasons why we are having the interest rate regime that we have today.
If we have a vibrant and efficient economy, people will earn more, save more, businesses will certainly make more profits. All these things, and of course, government will run either lower deficit or some surplus. They come together to constitute your savings rate that then makes the funds available for businesses. But when you don't have these things, and you see that we have something we call immersive analysis, where you don't look at numbers, but you just go out there and experience things, and it gives you a sense of what is going on. Why is government having difficulties financing infrastructure? The money simply isn't there. Why do it takes, when we're doing the long-term plan, one of the reports we had from a very good housing experts, it takes an average of 20 years for the average Ghanaian to build a house.
20 years.
20. 20 years.
2 decades.
Yes, 2 decades. Because, and you know how we all do that. First, you get the land.
Yes.
Secondly, you have to fight off the land guards.
And
so you have
some
to
other people, yes.
Yes, so
to protect the land for you.
Before the first thing,
the wall around
exactly.
it.
And imagine, go to the U.S. where they build houses without walls. Here, the first thing we do is to build a wall.
Yes.
But the
you have
bulk
to protect the land.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because of lawlessness. So land use also. Now, before the long-term plan, we even had the National Spatial Development Framework. And that was also supposed to deal with the issue of land. So as a result of that, the Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority was set up. But last year or the year before, no, last year. And it's there, waiting for resources
but
to get
now,
them.
government's major solution to that land problem is land digitization. The government says it will make it easier for land to be registered, acquired, and used for what it ought to be used for. Prudent policy.
Prudent policy, but needs to be implemented. There's also another law. There are so many laws, but we're not implementing them. There's another law called the local governance law that brought together all sorts of. We need to be able to ensure that local government is as effective as it should be. It is not.
Currently.
In fact, I dare say that it is the weakest link in our development agenda. Nothing goes on at the local level.
The assemblies meet, the assemblies determine composite budgets, the assemblies contribute, they try and determine for themselves what they ought to be the projects in the area. They meet, but shouldn't that be enough? They get their budget,
those are
they
inputs.
do the small projects.
Those are inputs.
Yes.
We may have to give them more autonomy still. I detest the practice, for example, of doing centralized procurement.
Devolution.
Let them do that. Years ago, about 10 years ago, I did some projects in the central region, and that was the single biggest complaint I had from the districts. The talk to the people in Accra, they should stop buying things for us. It's undermining our ability for contract management. It's undermining our ability for procurement. Look at dustbins. How the hell do you sit in Accra and buy dustbins for 216 districts? How?
Comprehensive purchasing may reduce the cost.
No.
I mean, we have done some work on the investigations that suggests that it doesn't always inure to the benefit of the people, actually.
And besides that, different districts have different priorities.
That's true.
So this district may well need dustbins. The next district, they just had a rainstorm where the roof on the school got blown off. That's where the money should go.
Okay.
But someone is sitting in Accra saying, buy dustbins. They did that with graders several years ago. They bought graders for everything, whether they needed it or not. So we need to really empower them by making sure that the law is implemented. But even before that, years ago I went to the local council or whatever it's called as part of my district, and I was telling them about stray animals. You know what they told me? They said I should go and catch the animals and bring them.
That's interesting.
Yes. So, in my typical jovial self, I asked the lady, so you mean I should catch it like that boachery thing? And she said, yeah. And she didn't even get the joke. But they were sitting there. They said, well, you know, we don't have a vehicle. So if you catch it and bring it, then what happens? Nothing. No systems. And yet every year, government makes sure that they are paid and paid more. Nothing is getting done. So until these institutional prerequisites for transformation are met, again, it's like an old engine with premium oil. You can have the most brilliant policies. And then the issue of corruption and waste, I prefer that term.
Okay, I'll come to that point, but I need to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. My guest today is Dr. Nimoy Thompson, wonderful economist, former Director General of the National Development Planning Commission. After the break, we have a lot to talk about on the Ghanaian economy and the way forward. You welcome back. This is Upfront. My guest today is the economist, Dr. Nimoy Thompson. He was until recently the Director General of the National Development Planning Commission, and their responsibility was really to tell us how we're going to run the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years into this economy. They developed what you consider the 40-year development plan along the line.
Plan, yeah.
I don't know what's happening to that. I mean, of course, they call it long-term, though. I don't know what's happening to that. Are we going to abandon like we abandoned Vision 2020, and we are almost into Vision 2020, and yet not realize based on the things that we said we would achieve under that particular vision. So, Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you.
I was still on a talk with you about, and again, let me then finish off the conversation on the fundamentals of the economy. Now, government has always said, and the Vice President has been very vociferous in making the point that our fundamentals are stronger now. They are improving fast. They are becoming very great, unlike we saw before. Indeed, the reference has been made to GDP growth rate, the reference has been made to international gross reserves, and also import cover. We've also had government referencing inflation.
Debt GDP ratio.
Debt to GDP ratio.
Deficit GDP ratio.
Yes,
and
deficit.
Things,
I mean, government will be saying that unlike what happened prior to the last 2 years we got into government, we have done enough to make you convinced that we've headed the right direction. And soon, the evidence will be seen on the ground.
Soon. Okay, you qualify that as soon. Those are intermediate indicators. Yes, I followed the debates. I heard the Vice President say that. But not long after that, the President himself considered that we do have challenges. So clearly two divergent views. One person saying that we don't have any problems, the President acknowledging that we do have challenges. The problem is that if you don't acknowledge that you have a problem, then you will not solve the problem. So we do have problems. I did listen to the Vice President. He cited things like debt GDP ratio and so forth and so on.
Inflation.
Inflation, yeah.
In fact, even exchange rate. He's very
rate.
convinced that this is one of the best performances we had for a very long time. Indeed, he proceeds to say that we are in good company. Check the emerging, what they call it, markets across the world, the big brands that we are running with. We seem to be fairly good in that company.
No. You should also look at the surveys that have been done by AGI and is it Pricewaterhouse or one of the leading accounting firms where businesses cite that. I think the last figure I saw 63% or 53% of them saying that it's a major problem for them. And we need to confront these things.
Okay.
I know that if I were in this position, yes, I would try and put a good spin on it. But if you step back from it and try to be objective, you realize that we have ways to go. And some of the indicators really aren't what they are cracked up to be. So you look at debt GDP ratio, for example, which was around 70% thereabout. It's come down substantially. That is what he was referring to. Is that something we really can boast about? Not really. Look at Japan. Japan's debt GDP ratio is 240%. Does that mean that if we have 62%, we have a better managed economy, more dynamic economy than Japan, which has 240? An average of, I think, 130% over the past 30, 40 years. No, it's your ability to service your debt. That's more of an indicator. And there I have to say, yes, the government has done well. Last year and also part of this year, they managed to reduce the debt servicing versus budget. So they had the budget amount that they had set out to service the debt. And by the end of the year, they had a much lower figure. So that's certainly good. And this year, they've also done that. The problem is that after they've saved that aspect of it, they then overrun the wage bill. So basically, the money they save in debt servicing implicitly goes in funding consumption rather than going into investment.
Okay.
There is also an issue that I think we need to talk about, which is what I call the oil myth. Because if you listen to the president during the campaign, he was asked, in fact, during the BBC interview, he was asked how he was going to finance his development agenda. Yes, and so forth. And he kept talking about oil money and so forth and so on. The problem, and Ghanaians need to know this, that really there's hardly any oil money there. We are not the big oil producer that we thought. We're not even in the top 40.
That's true.
And by the year 2023, it will be declining anyway. How much? Yet oil tends to distort growth. So the 8.1 we're talking about was largely the result of oil moving from negative territory to positive. So it grew by 80%.
So in 2016 was in the negative?
Yes. Yes. 2015, 16.
Jumped very high.
To 80%. Yes. And then it's going to decline again. Now, you ask yourself, for a sector that grew by 80%, what was its contribution to revenue, for example? And corporate taxes from oil by the budget was less than 1%.
I see.
Less than 1%.
That's woefully inadequate.
Woefully inadequate because the linkages, how much of it do we even own? The little money we make is usually from royalties and land rents and things like that. But in terms of the corporate
Small
taxes line, it's less, it's 0.7%. And yet everyone keeps thinking that we have this oil money coming. For the first 2 years, 2011 and 2012, it was zero.
And yet we are even issuing more oil blocks. We are doing auctioning of these.
They can go ahead and do that. But we shouldn't fool ourselves in thinking that we are the next Saudi Arabia or Nigeria or Angola. In fact, Saudi Arabia alone produces more oil in 1 week than we produce in an entire year. So we are nowhere there. So personally, I think that we should plan as if there's no oil.
I see.
Because it's very disruptive. I don't know if you went through the budget. You realize that last year the government put down zero for oil company taxes from oil companies. Yeah. But then by the middle of the year, they had some money.
Change, yeah.
This year, too, they put down zero. When the minister did his mid-year review, he had, I think, 363 million or so. So it's become even disruptive for managing the economy. My preference would be that let's review the Oil Revenue Management Act, put all oil money into GIF, Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, and let's run the economy.
Not the stability, not the heritage, not all of those fanciful things that we put together.
Exactly, fanciful you say. Yeah. What do we get from that? Put them in
Some
infrastructure.
Of them for the future, actually.
What is it?
Some is for the future.
Like when is the
heritage fund?
Yeah, but what constitutes the future?
I say some 20, 30, 40 years
now. You see, now you've given three different. No.
Yes.
Use
run out
now.
Of the resource when the generations that have not yet benefited from its use today.
The best thing to help those generations is to leave them with good infrastructure, good schools, good hospitals, good roads, and whatnot. Not to wait and then give them money.
Really?
So I've never been in favor of those things. The Norways and whatnot that we were using for models, they were relatively well developed. They had met most of their development needs. We are just starting. But I'm saying that we need to be, given the volatile nature and the unreliable nature of oil revenue, both for the oil budget, annual budget funding amount and so forth. We were budgeting and managing our economy before oil.
Okay, to be clear, so far we've had less than 6 billion from our entire oil fields, as in country Ghana, coming into our kitty. That's not so huge, is it?
It's no, definitely not. In fact, if you look at between 2011 and 2017, we got 53% less than we were expecting. If you look at budget, our turn, it was 53% less.
That's a
than
problem.
we got. Yes, so there's nothing to be gained from that. Yes, within that small area of oil production and gas production, there is some benefit. They give us the associated gas, you have those running, that's good. But we shouldn't make more of it than it really deserves. And if we take our minds off that and then begin to grow the non-oil sector of the economy, that's where jobs are going to come from.
Manufacturing?
Manufacturing, services. And in manufacturing, there are two key areas. I told you earlier that we had proposed 25 strategic growth areas. Yeah. 2 of those areas are agro-processing and pharmaceuticals.
I see.
Yes. And they have a much wider scope or spectrum of employment from the basic skills all the way to the high-level skills, universities, as opposed to just going in for graduates. You could have a whole spectrum of that. Both the pharmaceuticals industry alone can bring us as much as $10 billion a year.
But we don't seem to be focused on that.
We are not doing that. We've made all the recommendations. We are not focusing on that. Instead, we look at things like, oh, let's go and get more oil companies and so forth. The companies are there. And one of the recommendations we made when the government came into power, and we're doing alignment, because we had to align the MPP's manifesto with the long-term plan, was that, listen, what is the end game with 1D, 1F, for instance, one district, one factory?
Good policy?
Good policy notionally.
Factories, manufacturing, that's where we create the jobs, isn't it?
That's where we create the jobs. But if you have 4 years to prove yourself, you need to be strategic in the deployment of your resources.
I see.
And so you need to look at where jobs are created. Jobs, on average, 80% of new jobs are created by existing businesses.
I see, not new ones.
No, not new ones, because it will take time for them to even break even, get markets, develop customers and whatnot. The existing ones already have done all those things.
But to be fair, these are people who are setting up factories. For example, pineapple processing.
Yes.
So the farmers, you recruit farmers, right? The farmers have to grow these crops.
Yes.
That's jobs given to people.
Yes.
You recruit also farmhands and other people in
Yes.
that category too. Processing of the
I'm not saying that you shouldn't
pineapple.
go for one district, one factory.
Yes.
But you need to be clear in your mind that in the short to medium term, it is not going to address your unemployment problem.
Not at all?
No.
Not
It
even
will-
as a contributory factor.
No, not in its entirety. If you 80% of your jobs are going to come from existing factories, implicitly 20% will come from the new businesses. And don't forget that we have something we call business mortality rate. If you register 100 businesses in January of any given year, by December, some of them would have fallen by the wayside.
true.
It's not just Ghana, it's a global phenomenon. So you have all these things to contend with. Meanwhile, you have existing businesses waiting for assistance to be able to employ more people.
I get your point. So if you put the money in all of this, I mean, if you put assistance you can give to fresh companies, into old ones that need the same help, that need...
You are not completely abandoning the old and new ones.
Yes.
You still have them on your drawing board.
by balance the sheet.
Yes, but you need to focus more because this is where you want to create employment. For instance, in agro-processing, one of our biggest problems is packaging.
I see.
And we need to set up the systems, working with Ghana Standards Authority. There's a law actually that says that you should first have a sense of the markets you're exporting to. There are so many things they need to do, even nutritional information. We just recently got a couple of years ago, the EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement, that says, well, you can export pretty much anything to Europe. But
the
a lot of
standards.
things, yes, because over there, they pay attention to nutritional information. Every single thing you consume must have information on carbohydrate, fat, salt, all these things. There's a locally made drink called Nourisher, pineapple, that I like.
Yeah.
And I always say to myself, look at this good drink, but they cannot export to the European Union.
Because it lacks the
There's no nutritional information on
But
there.
even here in this country, nutritional information is one of the things that's required by the
laws,
the Emissions Decree.
who enforces that? You see, so we take things for granted, and then we expect people to respect us. They're saying export, and I'm pretty sure, let them improve the packaging, the technical quality, put the nutritional information, and then export to the European Union and let them tell you that you can bring that in.
So, for example, if government were to be able to help these farmers
Yes.
or the processors in
Yes.
this case, or the producers of Nourisher, for
Yes.
example, to put up these systems in a much more competent way, they can expand and create more jobs.
And create more, 80% on average, they'll create for every 100 people who are unemployed, they will take 80 of them. That's on average. Because the potential, the market is there. Then in addition to that, because we actually recommended all these things in terms of institutional development, set up a manufacturing advisory council, agricultural exports advisory council. That will involve the
Different
Ministry
from
of
the Exim Bank?
No, this will be an advisory council.
Okay.
So it's not an implementing agency, but it will bring together people who know what it takes to improve exports for Ghana.
For standards, for example, they'll be able to
standards.
advise that you meet this standard.
Exactly.
And also create for yourself a local standard system that will be believed by the world.
Yes. In fact, there are international standards. We are just refusing to meet them. So, Brett, there was a case several years ago when Ghanaians, we do things anyhow in this country, but not in other countries. Ghanaians from here went to South Africa and started baking bread anyhow, selling. The South African police went and seized the bread and destroyed them.
I see.
Because you can't just go and bake bread and start, you need to put the nutritional information
Yes.
on there.
Oh, that's
Yes,
interesting.
but in Ghana, you can hide in a corner somewhere and bake bread.
And share.
And years ago, when the Accra-Kumasi road went through in Sawem, and I was going to Kumasi, the Accra-Kumasi road went through in Sawem, and there were these guys, they used to sell bread out in Sawem, and they were sitting in front of a public toilet, putting the bread in
Wow.
This is what we are contending with, and they're telling us no. So these Ghanaians whose bread was destroyed in Pretoria went and reported to the Ghana High Commissioner. So listen, these people have their laws.
Their standards.
You come here, you are supposed to obey. You can't just go. So these are the things we need to do if we want to be internationally competitive. And I remember meeting the president the day before he took office. And we both agreed that exports are critical to addressing the unemployment problem. So you need to involve your foreign missions, give them targets. The Chinese actually put people in various markets around the world. You go out there, right now we have 10% share of market for these glasses in Brazil. In the next 6 years, we want this to reach 18 or 22%.
So the embassies do not only relate
Of
government level,
course.
they are actually
They're
procuring business for their people.
Yes. And we're sitting here, they're telling us we should fast and pray. Madness, madness. So we need to get serious about these. These are the drivers of growth.
So with all these people, what have we been doing that we are failing to do these basic things? What has been the concentration? Why have we decided that, for example, we would build new factories regardless of what the state of the old ones are?
Very good question. The political economy question of, and this is not just relevant to the current government, but as we move towards elections, other political parties should address that question. How you frame your manifesto promises.
Yeah.
Must you, once you win, must you implement your manifesto promises one-to-one, or must you filter them through a more rigorous system? Because when you're outside, you're a little bit idealistic. You don't know what the hell is going on.
I mean, because to be fair, the government promised to build a factory in each district.
Yes.
In the first year, the promise was 51 of them. None of them materialized,
Yes.
to be fair.
Because the reality now is different. On the campaign platform, it resonates well. But once you are behind the steering wheel, you realize that the reality. So how do we, shouldn't we modify our campaign promises?
Wouldn't that be deception?
Yes, I'm sure the fear is that, well, the
people will think that we
the
deceive
opposition.
them.
So now you
and
need to be
used against us when
Yes.
they're going into the election.
So instead of promising a NAPCO with specific modules that you're going to implement at all costs, even when your revenues are falling short, you may want to promise to create employment. And then once you come in, you have more of a flexibility in determining the strategies for creating employment, rather than boxing yourself into specific initiatives. Another one is this payment of allowances to nurses and whatnot. In the midst of a situation where you are still coming, in fact, first of all, it's not non-productive spending.
Really?
I suppose, of course, because it's just consumption. Well, because if you notice with that, as I said, I wish I could show you the table, a rise in the wage bill, consistently, not just now, but it's been going on. And then a decline in investment infrastructure. In fact, the last analysis I did where I adjusted for inflation, investment spend, infrastructure spending last year could buy less once you adjust for inflation than they did in 2008.
Really?
Yes, because inflation has eaten into it and the absolute levels themselves are declining. And when you do that, there's no way you can grow your economy without investing.
Oh, okay.
You need to invest in your economy for it, yes. So look around you, and this is what, you know, in addition to the long-term plan, there's several other documents associated with that. It's unfortunate that they didn't even wait to see the document, and some of them rejected that.
Really?
Yes. We also have, because it pains me when I hear them, we went to Rwanda. What does Rwanda have? Rwanda has a long-term plan just as we do. They have Vision 2050.
But they have a strict regime that actually implements these plans.
Yes, we can do that. That's why we have a different political economic system. That's why we decided to have a multi-party approach and to overlap it with the electoral cycle. People think, oh, 40 years is too far. 40 years is only 10 elections.
Yeah,
from 2020. It's only 10 elections.
That's true.
And by our analysis, the last election before Ghana turns 100 will be in 2056. And the last group of Ghanaians who would be 40 years in 2056 and therefore qualify to run for president in 2056 were born in 2016.
That's true.
So the future for all practical purposes is here.
That's true.
While going for lunch, you might have walked by the president of Ghana in 2057 without even you knowing, with a backpack going to school.
And that's interesting.
Yes, the future is here. And yet we took 40, but most of the targets that we set for the long-term plan are all between 2018 and 2029, 2030, most of them. The others, whether you plan for them or not, they will come. Our population will grow. We projected around 60 million, 57 or so million around 2057. Would you believe that the UN has already projected Ghana's population to the year 2100? They are projecting that we will be 76 million. So whether you plan for that or not, it will come. But the advantage of planning is that you get to use population levels to determine your housing policy, to determine your education policy, to determine how you build it. Let me share something with you here.
Before I do so, and because I'm running out of time, there's this germane question of what's currently happening. Government is actually seeking to bridge the infrastructure gap. We've always complained about having a huge gap in that area.
Yes.
China is the destination. 2 billion is what's supposed to come in. In fact, this year, the budget says that we're expecting some 500 million immediately for roads, for schools, for the basic things that's going to improve our productivity going forward. Step in the right direction, China to the rescue.
To a limited extent. As I said, in addition to the plan, we actually have a 30-year infrastructure plan that looks at all aspects. I think I gave you the little booklet.
I've seen that. Yeah.
All aspects of infrastructure, roads, rails, air, sea, water, river, everything is covered in there, including even anticipation of charging stations for electric vehicles. We've anticipated all that. And the strategy was that in 2017, we should have organized an international conference on financing infrastructure in Ghana.
Okay.
And then we'll give the investors the menu of projects, that this is what we have. So then they will, because we've already prioritized, they come in. Our target was to raise 100 billion US dollars, not 2 billion or 10 billion.
Is 2 billion too small?
Inadequate. We have major infrastructure backlog. I'm sure you've flown into Accra or Kumasi and seen all the brown roads and whatnot. In fact, one of our strategies was that by a certain date, certainly within 10 years, all open gutters should go. We'll cover all gutters.
Does it matter whether we have a Sino-Hydro deal for them to build for us, taking our bauxite?
The problem with the Chinese is that, and we need to, this is where we need to drive a hard deal with them. Because I've looked at two examples, two projects. The court complex here in Accra, and the Cape Coast, the new court complex, and the Cape Coast Stadium. Relatively new, 2-3 years. They were all falling apart already. So you want to make sure that you are not giving them your bauxite or whatever, because ultimately it's money. Only for them to send some cheap construction companies here, build stuff for you that begin to collapse. Because when you go to the court complex in there, it's already waterlogged. First of all, it wasn't even properly built. One of our recommendations was that every single major building that attracts large numbers of people should have multiple parking underneath, so you don't have problems with that.
I have a question, and I mean, I'm scared how the future looks from the way we are going about it.
Yes. It scares me too. It scares me too.
It looks like we are missing every important opportunity to do the right thing.
Yes.
And also it looks like we are, if it's deliberate or ignorantly, pursuing perhaps that's not going to yield the results that we ought to get. This is not because we have a lack of information or specific things to do. Do you think we will ever get where South Korea is anytime soon?
Gosh, man, you summed it up so well. I'm even getting chills. Would you believe that we had a higher per capita income than South Korea in 1962? It was 73% higher than South Korea. Today, our per capita income is only 5% of South Korea's. And what did they do? When we met with the South Korean ambassador, he said meritocracy in your public sector, meritocracy. You need an efficient public sector. Over there, just as in Japan, they took the best students from their best universities to work in their public sector. We have trivialized and politicized the public sector. Every new government comes in with its own people. The chief director is moved around. People are kicked around and so forth and so on. Even at the local level, you go in there and train people. You go back there 3 months later, the person has been moved. So we are joking. And again, as I said, institutional reforms. I'm glad that you have this pessimistic view of the future. It's not necessary, because I have that also. You can look at what is going on now and project into the future and remind ourselves that development is not guaranteed. Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, is 200 years old. Liberia is 171 years old. So it is not a given, because in the long-term plan, we project...
you would automatically get better.
No! That's why we said the 40 years was placing Ghana as a high-income country ahead of us in 2050s, and then working our way backwards.
I have a last question.
Yes.
Can the president currently deliver on the promises and the goals of a developed Ghana?
He would need institutional support, and he will have to be at a place where he bangs his fist on the desk and said, damn it, I need this thing done, get this. South Korea, you were talking about South Korea, that's what Park Chung-hee did. He, for instance, reviewed the exports, because they used export development strategy. And he reviewed the quarterly reports every single year for the 18 years that he was in office. And when you missed your target, he fired you. He gave you a chance to redeem yourself. Thereafter, you were gone. Now, the president, when we met him, for example, was very much in favor of the long-term plan. Only for the senior minister to say, well, I'm not interested in that. I can't go with anything more than 10 years and so forth and so on. In the same breath, he said that he was in favor of the SDGs, which is 15 years. And then the SDGs came after the MDGs, which is also 15 years. So 30 years. And the MDGs, even though they started in 2020, the baseline was in 1990. So together, the UN has a 40-year plan. We are in favor of that. But our own, from We said no.
Doc, we should do this
don't want
conversation once again, and we should do more of this. I appreciate your coming today, and thank you so much for joining us.
I enjoyed it.
Well, folks, that's where we end today's edition of Upfront. Thank you so much for watching.